I'm Couch Cooper. Today we're going to be talking about ray-traced games on the PlayStation 5, or RT modes as it's sometimes called. There's a lot of games that exist to this rule, but I've plucked out the ones that shine out to me, that have the most noticeable ray tracing or ray-traced updates. We've had a few changes in bigger games in recent months. What is ray tracing? Well, it goes back a little bit further than you think. Essentially, it's maths used on visual objects to simulate how light hits them or how shadows work. Previously, without AI or complicated algorithms, developers or people experimenting with true light and its behaviors would have to predict it or even sort of make do with the best they could by eye. Now it's all official mathematical equations which really give it that realism. Ray tracing in video games normally falls into two categories: reflections and shadows. Rarely do you see it both, however, because the CPU and GPU would struggle with simulating those two different types of ray tracing algorithm. It'd be a lot of hard work, so some developers just choose one. We're going to start with GTA 5 on the PlayStation 5. That's very important because they added ray traced reflections in December 2022, and it looks incredible. It is a super old game, to be fair, and it does give you a good excuse to A, purchase it for the 16th time, and B, have a good look at it on your new PlayStation 5. Beware, you can go nowhere near your PlayStation 4 buddies online. This is completely standalone, PlayStation 5 only. I've also chosen GTA 5 because it's one of the few games on this list that has three graphical modes: a quality, a performance, and an RT mode that tries to keep to 60 frames per second and include those reflections. So fantastic stuff from Rockstar. My second choice, of course, is Mortal Shell, and we're at the other end of the scale here, only looking at ray trace shadows. So this is super interesting because this game is very atmospheric. A lot of it's at night, so using light sources and having dark and dingy shadows cast across areas really does increase that suspense, a little bit of terror in there. You'll see some more games that really push on this later, but it's cool to see two ends of the scale: GTA with the reflections and Mortal Shell with the shadow. One major aspect of the Mortal Shell situation is that you get a PlayStation 5 free upgrade with all this added tech. With the GTA situation, you're having to buy a brand new copy of the game, which is off. No additional content. They would have done so well with that if they'd have bowled it in with a little bit more campaign DLC, exclusive to that system. It's terrible how they have peddled out that base game on every platform and asked for top dollar each time. I digress. It's time for Elden Ring. We had the 1.09 patch give us ray-traced shadows only, not reflections. Kind of broke my heart a bit. People often ask me in comments on other videos why I do these Elden Ring patch reviews. I review every single patch religiously as it comes out, and I got so lucky with getting to clap eyes on ray tracing for this game for the first time. But back to the point, the channel would get about 16 views if I didn't get involved with Elden Ring patches. It's been really good on traffic, and the game is so pretty as well. It was my game of the year, and I think it's one of the more stunning PlayStation 5, not exclusive obviously, and there's very few exclusives on this list, which is another subject for another day. Now that brings me on to frame rates, and we had the conversation about power and the two modes of ray tracing taking up said CPU or GPU. The frames will always suffer as well. You won't see a quality mode with ray tracing that runs at 60 frames per second yet on the PlayStation 5, and some games, when they're in their quality modes, don't have a pegged 30 frames per second. And Elden Ring, unfortunately, is one of them. It does detract a bit. They will get on top of it, and they vastly improved it with 1.09. There is a slight correlation with reflections and open world games and the lack of. It's a big old job to go through and actually implement ray trace reflections in every bit of surface water in an open world game. Shadows is a little bit easier, and so that's the fruition of this. It's an incredible looking game now, and I really love the idea of having that added input of the ray traced mode. Okay, here's a bit of industry gossip for you. Battlefield 2042 does not have any ray traced graphics on the current generation system consoles, PS5, Xbox One X. It does, however, have it as an option on the PC version, and you do see this. We've had it with another game that's coming up. So bog standard stuff, a bit of a down mark, but we do have some good news on the military shooter front. Yes, Call of Duty Cold War comes with ray trace shadowing, so it's a major plus, and they keep it in for the split screen, which is gobsmacking. No reflection complication here. This is purely about great lighting and distinctive shadow direction. This game also runs at 120 frames per second if you've got a TV that supports it, and just having it on the split screen is a real pleasure. You will see it amazingly implemented in that campaign, but if you know the channel, I'm big on the zombie modes with this. It could be one of the standout zombie modes for the PlayStation 5 full stop. It's incredibly huge. That Cold War will be linked and annotations for the standalone review. Okay, we're back to reflections for the amazing Ghostrunner on the PlayStation 5. This game actually runs at a hell of a pace for what it's showing you. It manages 4K, 30 frames per second is a bit of a struggle, but it's certainly an extremely pegged performance. It's got a lot of neon and reflective surfaces, so it really does like to push the sort of cyberpunk angle with its bright colours sliding around. It's all very well having RT in your video game, but you've got to utilise it well, and Ghostrunners is one of the best. So what happens if you don't have your ray tracing mode on, or you turn your quality mode off and use the performance mode? Well, you'll get a lower resolution and slightly less effects in game, but you'll get what I call a peg 60. That's a reference to pegged 60 frames per second. And with some video games that's essential, and others you can get by without it. And Ghostrunner is certainly one that runs at a pretty damn pegged 30, but it's these visuals that keep you coming back, and the game's fluidity. I guess the first of our three sci-fi mammoths, I'm going to say, in the form of Callisto Protocol, a great sci-fi horror thriller, but get this, you get a combination of hybrid shadows and ray-traced reflections. This is the first on the list that's trying to give you best of both worlds. The frame rates in that performance mode are also very good, staying as close to 30 as you could probably get considering the amount of crazy stuff that happens to you in this game. It didn't get sung about enough on release. It had to go head-to-head with another certain sci-fi game, but I think Callisto really shone in the areas it needed to, one of which being absolutely stellar current-gen graphics. The game has been quite heavily patched since launch, so you might want to have a look at the 1.04 video. Things got up to notch when they injected a lot of after day one content, because I think it might have been a little bit rushed out, but certainly worth looking at. Staying firmly in the horror sphere, we've got the RE4 Remake, and this one is extremely interesting because we have ray-traced reflections. Now, the Resident Evil games aren't big on large expanses of water, but thinking about that RE4 campaign, there's actually loads of water in it, but the reflections don't really stop at standing water. Any real surface, if it's the right perceived material, then it will have changes in light and flickerings. You see that in the ground and a lot of the walls in the game. One thing I was surprised at is that the shadows don't actually get a huge mention when you look up the breakdown of what sort of ray tracing is in this game, but it is a stunning visual piece of work, and the original Resident Evil 4 and the Resident Evil team have a really good understanding of how shadows work in horror and how framing and deep blacks are really handy. I was just quite taken aback that this wasn't ray trace shadows also, but it does run beautifully. That would explain why just reflections are here, because you get a great performance with it also. This is one of the few games that I love playing on quality mode. Everything coming up I play on quality mode, which is quite a rarity. Okay, it's time for our next big hitter, and it is GT7. I bought this game because of its ray tracing. Obviously, it is all about reflections on the paintwork, but the people that make this series have their own sort of take on shadows and realism, and it does really work, especially in those replays. It's absolutely crazy stuff. It switches off the ray tracing sometimes, can you believe, when you're in that quality mode and racing, but it's on full on the whole way through these replays. It is one of the greatest things about the game, seeing these classic cars or even new modern vehicles, even concept, hurtling around tracks, any track in the world, and these beautiful camera angles. You can adjust the daytime, but we haven't got to the jewel in the crown, which is essentially the game's weather and wet look mechanic. Is it a peg 30 frames per second on these replays? Not all the time. And if you've got like 21 cars on track, water and smoke and tyres squealing everywhere, you will see some stagger. Also, the game doesn't feature any real cosmetic damage, i.e. debris coming off the cars or things on track. You do see a tiny little bit of the rubber from the tyres on some of the apex shoulders, which is amazing. But this is the pinnacle for PlayStation 5 graphics. It really is one of my favourite looking video games. It's now time for the Deadspace Remake, or a lesson in lighting as I call it. This is purely shadow and ambient effects, so the light interacting with smoke and draw distance, all kinds of crazy shadows and split light. It's a beautiful thing to behold, and it's dark, foreboding atmosphere of this craft you're on. It's kind of the star of the show, along with the necromorphs and horrendous aliens you're killing. Working your way through these corridors and looking at Ishimura with all these effects is really gobsmacking. I love the way it immerses you. You have the same thing with Alien Isolation. Imagine if that game rolled out on current gen with ray tracing, reflections and shadows and a graphical rework. Yeah, we would snap it up. Also got a completely workable 30 frames per second. This game can be quite action heavy, but it's luxurious when you have that quality mode on with this high resolution and all of these modern effects in. It's not an open world game, so you are dealing with quite railsy box-like game design. This allows so much visual freedom with the power of the machine to just go crazy. Every room is full of light sources, smoke and detail. The game also completely rolled out the gate like this. It wasn't a Callisto where there was performance issues day one, or even like Elden where they had to sort of put it in at a later date and it still doesn't really run at a peg 30. This is pristine, amazing, day one stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. He's done what? He's put Cyberpunk in 2077 in his ray tracing list. I know, and it did come after a massive delay. Well, first we had a huge delay on the PlayStation 5 version of this game, full stop. Then we had the addition of ray trace shadows only, no reflections. Slightly higher resolution with that patch, so we did see some added detail, but its performance in ray trace mode is still a bit iffy. But remember, we're dealing with a massive open world game here, no real load screens on traversing that huge map, so I think they did quite well considering it just took them 2.5 years. I think it's one of the more interesting games on the list, and very recently, in actual fact, just as I'm recording this video, RTX have released all this amazing PC power, which does include some quite high technology reflection additions. So this cyberpunk neon world with reflections on the road with these shadows and lighting would be insane. It's something I will get to look at probably in my 70s when I've remortgaged my house to afford that graphics card. We are very likely to see more improvement visually from CDPR on this game with current gen systems, and there will probably be an exclusive patch coming up for PlayStation 5 and Xbox One X's. Remember, this list isn't really about how good the game is, it's all about how well that RT pops and how much has been added over time to increase the fidelity on those modes. And this one is really shining. It's just a shame base game's a little bit buggered. Just very briefly, before we get to number one, games don't have to have ray tracing in to look incredible. God of War Ragnarok is a great example of that, and of course Horizon Forbidden West. Forbidden West exists in a massive open world, and it would need that CPU and GPU power, I think, to be able to push those visuals out as they are now. It's incredible. We've got the new Burning Shores to look at, which will be on the channel soon. I did want to drop a quick honorary for Metro Exodus and of course Ratchet & Clank, but those games have been on the channel before. Ratchet & Clank is the only one of 3 PlayStation 5 exclusives, so it does not need to feature. One of the glaring disadvantages that a game with ray tracing has if it comes out of the gate with ray tracing means that I don't get to see it without, and with this I played it extensively with no ray trace reflections. That's important, that's the only thing that's added. However, nearly every floor is reflective and every surface shiny, and of course the light bounces off all the explosions, but the thing that puts it right at the top is its speed and its performance on frames. It's absolutely white knuckle, this game, and ray tracing barely knocks that performance at all. Anybody who bought the Doom Eternal base game on the PlayStation 4 got a free PlayStation 5 upgrade. It's a full-on, sits on the SSD, load screens are minimal, they're like seconds, you're straight back into it. The game is worth a replay on the PlayStation 5 with this RT injection. Also, if it mucked around with its performance too much, it just wouldn't be worth looking at. Imagine Doom that staggered on frames, it just wouldn't be a thing and you'd have to stay in that performance mode. But this is a thing to behold, one of my favourite RT modes in a video game currently, Doom Eternal. I have been GouchGoob. I hope you enjoyed that. It was fun to make, and obviously I've missed out loads of games and there will be new and patched editions coming up. I'll try and maybe remake this early next year or something, but these games that I've shown you, I think there's enough to be going with there. So take care guys, I will be seeing you down there.